Okay, so we might begin if that's all right with everyone. So as I said, you're all very welcome and thanks very much for taking the time to come to the session today where we'll be looking at Turnitin. So in terms of what we're going to cover in the session, it's a little bit of a whistle-stop tour, but we'll try and get through as many items of use as possible. So we've kind of structured this session to try and, I suppose, mainly focus on the practical elements of Turnitin and to talk about what will hopefully be most useful to yourselves in terms of using it. I'm also in the Zoom session here with my colleagues Roisin and Sarah. If you do have any questions, please do put them into the Q&A and we'll try and deal with them as they come up, or if there's anything that needs a little bit more time and discussion, we'll address it at the end of the session. So to begin, what exactly is Turnitin? Turnitin is MTU's new plagiarism detection system, and it's replacing the previous system, which was original. What Turnitin does, I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, but what Turnitin does in a nutshell is it takes submissions from students and it compares those against potential unoriginal material. So it looks at submissions to from students in other universities who are using Turnitin, publications in peer-reviewed articles, journals, and web content. So it essentially takes student work, MTU student work, and it compares that against all these different sources to see if there's any potential instances of plagiarism. I suppose an important word there is potential. So even though Turnitin might turn up or identify something as, for example, plagiarized, that does not mean that the student has actually gone off and plagiarized material. Um, so with Turnitin, a key piece of advice that we would always encourage anyone using it to do is to actually look at the student's work, and generally it becomes clear quite quickly if Turnitin is attributing an instance of plagiarism where there is none. Very often it might just be a student forgot to put something in quotations or didn't cite a source properly, so on and so forth. The way that Turnitin works here in MTU is that it's integrated into the Canvas system. So what that means is any and every module in Canvas has the facility to use Turnitin, and therefore Turnitin is available to all MTU lecturers and students across all modules. So this is the, I suppose, digital learning ecosystem in MTU, and where Turnitin sits obviously is up here in the assessment area. And again, like with all of the digital learning software, we've tried to really make Canvas the hub or the kind of containing element for all the digital learning tools available. So rather than talk around it anymore, I think probably the most useful to show how to use Turnitin is to actually get into the process of setting up an assignment using Turnitin. So if we want to use Turnitin, the most straightforward and the most effective way of doing so is very simply to go into the relevant Canvas module that you want to use it in, to go into the assignments area and to create a new assignment. So we'll just call this assignment Turnitin demo, give it a name and some information. Now, the key thing when using Turnitin is the submission type. So to be able to use Turnitin, the submission type has to be set to online, and the items selected should be either text entry and or file uploads. Generally, we recommend file upload as the most straightforward way of creating an assignment for students. Now you'll notice at the moment there's nothing showing in terms of plagiarism review. As soon as I click file upload or text entry, you can see down here this area appears for plagiarism review. So if you're creating an assignment and you're concerned that you can't see any options around Turnitin, more often than not, that's simply because file upload or text entry hasn't been clicked. As soon as you click these, the plagiarism review option appears. So from here, if we want to use Turnitin, we very simply, under the plagiarism view, click on the drop down and select Turnitin. Now, original, which is the previous plagiarism detection system, is still there at the moment, very simply because we're just transferring all student submissions to original into MTU's Turnitin database. I'll talk a bit more about that later on. But the main thing to select is that the main thing to take away is that you should be selecting Turnitin. And when you pick Turnitin, a number of additional options appear here. So in terms of the options which are available, the way the process works, as I mentioned, is that students will submit against their assignments, and Turnitin will take the student submissions and compare it against all these other sources. So one of the first things we can pick is compare submissions against. Do you want Turnitin to compare submissions to this assignment against the student repository, which is basically MTU's internal kind of database of submissions? So any other Turnitin assignment, which students submit to in any other module in MTU, that's the student repository. So ideally, yes, we do want to compare it against that. Where that will be particularly useful is, let's say, if a student is plagiarizing work that one of their that is that a student for in the previous year of the course submitted, the student repository will catch that. The institutional repository, or excuse me, the institutional repository will catch that. The student repository refers to um, any other university which is using Turnitin. If student repository is ticked, Turnitin will compare submissions to this assignment against those. So that's like the worldwide Turnitin database, student repository. Institutional repository is MTU's own internal Turnitin database. Any and every submission against Turnitin by an MTU student, institutional repository will compare submission to this assignment against those. Website content is very simply the World Wide Web. Periodicals, journals, and publications is much the same. So generally, when it comes to compare submissions against, the recommendation is to simply leave all of these ticked. By default, they'll all be ticked. And you can basically, the recommendation is that you just leave it this way. This just ensures that the student work is getting compared against, as wide a net or as big a net as possible. So store submission and in then this drop down here. What this basically means is that depending on what you select here, Turnitin will or will not take submissions to this assignment and add it to, I suppose, the Turnitin kind of repository. If we decide if we select do not store the submitted papers, what this means is that Turnitin will compare submissions to this assignment against all the things that we've listed here, but it's not going to add the student submission to this assignment to that repository. So if you think about Turnitin as having like a worldwide database and then a smaller MTU database, if we select this, then that means that students will submit to this assignment. Turnitin will look for instances of plagiarism, but basically Turnitin won't keep student submissions to this assignment. It won't add submissions to this assignment to the database that it compares everything against. If we select institution paper repository, what this means is that Turnitin will, I suppose, add submissions to this assignment to kind of an MTU Turnitin database. So just submissions from MTU students or MTU assignments, but it won't share it with the wider world. If we select standard paper repository, basically submissions to this assignment will be added to Turnitin's kind of worldwide database. So if, for example, a student in Australia is somehow trying to copy an MTU student's paper, it will show up in this space. Now, if that sounds a bit confusing, it's because it maybe is, but I'll talk a little bit more about those later. In terms of which option to select, it's very much up to you as an individual. Some lecturers might feel that they do not want student submissions to kind of travel to be compared against anything, in which case you can select do not store the submitted papers. Some lecturers may feel I want student submissions, or I want submissions to this assignment to be added to a kind of the MTU Turnitin database. So for example, If a student submits an assignment, submits against this assignment, and a student next year tries to copy that, um, Turnitin will catch it. So institution paper repositories basically means Turnitin will keep the student work and add it to the MTU Turnitin database, but it won't go outside of MTU. So it's not going to be added to Turnitin's global database. And then standard paper repository basically means that Turnitin will take submissions to this assignment and it will add it to its global database. So as I said, if a student in Australia copies work from an MTU student, you know, the Australian university using Turnitin will catch that. It's very much up to your own decision in terms of which you are comfortable adding the student work to. And um, by default, standard paper repository is selected, but this really is an individual decision for each lecture in terms of what you're comfortable with kind of sharing with Turnitin. So it's very much an individual decision. And if you're not sure, I think generally a good rule of thumb is to simply talk to your students about it and ask them what they may or may not be comfortable with. Options then under similarity reports, you don't really need to worry about too much. This just kind of fine tunes the similarity reports that is produced just in terms of how it should interpret student work. So for example, if I click exclude bibliographic material, what that means is the similarity report will not count bibliographic material as an instance of plagiarism. The same for quoted material, the same for small sources, so on and so forth. And the final option is essentially just it adds a spelling and grammar element to the similarity report, which will be produced. The option then, in terms of showing report to students, allows you to determine whether students will see the report immediately after they submit, after the assignment is graded, after the due date, or never. We'll talk a little bit more about this a little bit later, but this is also kind of an important decision. If you allow if you select that the report should be shown to students immediately, what I'll do actually is I'll just put a deadline on this, for example, of the 22nd. So this assignment is due the 22nd of September. If I set this to show the report to students immediately, what that means is if a student submits on the 21st and Turnitin comes back and says, yeah, this is 90% plagiarized, that gives the student the opportunity to resubmit a non-plagiarized version of their work before the deadline. So it's essentially giving the student the opportunity to kind of to resubmit if Turnitin is showing a lot of plagiarized material. If I set this to after the assignment is graded, that is kind of removing that opportunity for that student. If show report to students is set to after the assignment is graded, from a student perspective, what that means is they'll submit their work. I, as a lecturer, will, see what plagiarism is detected and give them a score or kind of, deal with that situation. But the student won't see that their work has been identified as plagiarized until after I've given them their grades and feedback, at which point it's too late for the student to resubmit or to do anything else. Never very simply means that students will never see the similarity reports, so they'll never get an indication of how Turnitin identified their material. The key difference there really is whether you want to show it to students immediately or after the assignment is graded or never. If you set it to immediately, if a student submits ahead of the deadline, it is giving them the chance to, turn in a different version of their work if kind of plagiarism is showing as quite high. If we select after the assignment is graded or never, we're removing that opportunity for them. So from a student perspective, if it's immediately, they submit on, let's say, the 20th, the Turnitin says, hey, this is showing as like 90% plagiarized. And the student has until the 22nd to turn in a fresh version that doesn't have as much plagiarized material. If we set it to after the assignment is graded, from a student perspective, they submit, they hear nothing, and it's only when I release the grades and the feedback in Canvas that they get to see, yeah, this is showing up as 90% plagiarized. Again, That's an individual decision for lecturers to take. Personally, I would always set it to immediately. I would prefer that students, I suppose, have the opportunity to correct their mistakes if something does show up as quite high plagiarism. But again, it's very much an individual decision for you when you are setting up your assignment. So that, in terms of setting up a Turnitin assignment, is generally it. If you select text entry or file upload, then plagiarism review will appear. We select Turnitin. And then the key elements to decide really is, do you want student submissions to this assignment to be stored in the worldwide database, in the MTU database, or not at all? We would recommend leaving all of these ticked. And then do you want to show the report to students immediately so they have a chance to correct their mistakes if their work does show up as highly plagiarized? Or do you want to remove that opportunity for them? In which case you select after the report is graded or never. So once that's done, we can simply save and publish. And then from a student perspective, it's an assignment the same as any other. The only difference is there is this box, which is available here. So the students have to tick this box to agree to the end user license agreement. And it's also them making a statement that the assignment submission in there is their own original work. If I grab a file and I try to submit without ticking that box, Canvas will tell me you must agree to the submission pledge, this here, or you can submit the assignment. After students have submitted their work to the assignment, I can then identify the results of that by, if we leave student view, going into SpeedGrader. And within SpeedGrader, what I will see next to the student's work is a timing icon, which basically means that the similarity report is basically being processed at the moment. So what we can do is we can jump into a Turnitin instance that we created earlier. And within SpeedGrader for this one, you can see that Turnitin will have finished producing the report in question, and the similarity report is basically showing a score of 26. What that means very simply is that Turnitin has identified that potentially 26% of the material is plagiarized. If I want to look at the results of the plagiarism detection more in depth, what I can do is I can simply click on the plagiarism percentage or the score. And what that will do is it will open up the Turnitin similarity report. Now, the way that the similarity report interface is broken down is basically on the left-hand side, it's going to show me the student's submission. On the right-hand side, it's going to show me the results of the plagiarism detection. What I can do is there's numerous ways of kind of looking through the work, but essentially what I can do is if I want to on the left-hand side, I can simply click on anything which Turnitin has highlighted, and on the right-hand side then that's going to show me where Turnitin thinks this material has been taken from. So one way of doing it is I can simply click through the various kind of items that have been selected over here, and on the right hand side, excuse me, that will show me where Turnitin thinks the material has come from. An alternative way of doing it, if you don't want to go through that entire process, is that you can simply scroll down the area on the right hand side, and what I will do is it's going to show me the various instances where it thinks plagiarism detection has occurred. Um, an alternative way of doing that is, which I would tend to do myself, is I simply click on sources. And what that will do is it will show me, I suppose, all the various online spaces where Turnitin thinks material could have been taken from. And you can see there it's going to give me a percentage breakdown. So I can see that this URL, rm.coe.int, is showing up in 11 text blocks. It's from the internet. It's showing as 267 matched words in this document, and that's constituting 5% of the total plagiarism detection score. And the same throughout the entire kind of space. You can see there that things are broken down or categorized, whether Turnitin thinks it's been taken from the internet or whether Turnitin thinks it's been taken from student papers, in this instance, the University of South Africa or Thammasat University. What I can do if I feel like doing so is I can click on the filter item up here. And what this will allow me to do is it will allow me to adjust some of the items which we had previously ticked in our Turnitin options. So for example, compare submissions against, we know what that is already. But I might decide I want to exclude bibliographies, exclude quoted text, exclude cited sources, so on and so forth. And if I hit apply filters, then you'll see there that kind of what that has done is it has changed the similarity report score from 26 to 30. So the filters that I had ticked had I suppose, had the impact of not counting quoted text, not counting bibliographic material in the plagiarism detection score. What you might find as well very often is, for example, I might have asked a student to write a report on a paper contained on rm.coe.int. So what that might mean is that Turnitin will show up a lot of material from this source as plagiarized material, but it might not be that case at all. It might be the case that I've asked the students to write a report on a publication on that space. So the student doing that will potentially show up quite a bit of material as plagiarized. So if I decide that, for example, okay, I don't want anything from this source to be counted as plagiarized because chances are it's not. What I can do is I can click on sources up in the top right corner here. And what I can very simply do is I can click on this lock button to exclude that source. And what that will do is it will basically identify, okay, any material from rm.coe.int, I'm not going to Turnitin shouldn't count that as plagiarism. What that means is very simply anything from that, it's not going to count as plagiarism. And I can repeat that for any sources that I think are relevant. Um, and you'll notice as well as I'm doing that process, what we'll see up in underneath the overall plagiarism detection score is the exclusion. What that basically means is if I click on this, that there's 5 sources which I have identified to Turnitin as do not count this towards the plagiarism detection score. If I want to add those sources again, I can very simply click on include all sources. So that's counting everything. And again, if I want to, I can very simply just go through the process of, if I want to get more fine-tuned than that, excuse me, what I can do is I can simply click on what is presented to me here under match groups. And by clicking forward and backwards, I can move through the various instances of this in the document. So if I want to get really fine-tune it, I might say, okay, I'm not going to count that as plagiarized material, so exclude it. I'm going to count that as plagiarized. I'm not going to count that as plagiarized, so either exclude match, so on and so forth. And as I go through that process, you'll see it does change the overall similarity report score. So that is the process of accessing and I suppose interpreting the similarity report. You simply go into SpeedGrader, you click on the percentage score, and then you can adjust the findings accordingly from within this space. I already spoke a bit about the student submission options, so I don't think we need to spend too much more time on that. Yeah, basically kind of this is just a process of whether students' papers will be checked against other institutions' student submission, which is the standard paper repository, only other student papers within your institution, which is the institution paper repository, and do not store the submitted papers. So I suppose a couple of best practice kind of suggestions or kind of practical elements that we think are worth considering when using Turnitin. If you think there is an instance of plagiarism, it is recommended that you contact your HOD or your module coordinator. There is a kind of the current academic honesty and integrity policy is available on the website. But in general, It's not something which we in TEL can advise on. If you think there is an instance of plagiarism, that is a decision or a discussion to have with your HOD or module coordinator. The previous system which we had, original, we're in the process of migrating all submissions to original to basically MTU's Turnitin institution paper repository. So what that means is any student submissions which were submitted against the original system, they will be added to MTU's Turnitin database. So kind of submissions which happened last year, previous 2 years, those will be Turnitin will check any new submissions against those. A question which has come up before is an instance where someone may wish to, allow students. It comes up quite a bit with postgraduates, for example, writing their thesis. It may be the case that you want a student to be able to submit or to check their kind of, let's say, a draft of their thesis and turn it in, see if material is showing up as plagiarized, and then change that and submit their final thesis at a later date. So the process in which we would do that is we would recommend that you basically create two assignments, a draft submission and a final submission. And for the draft, submission, what we recommend you do is that you set the settings for the draft submission to do not store the submitted paper and show report to the students immediately. And basically this just has the effect. If we do not store the submitted paper, then the student will submit their draft thesis, but Turnitin won't kind of hang on to that paper. It won't compare any future submissions against that paper. And that's what you want, because you don't want a student submitting a draft version of their thesis, Turnitin kind of hanging on to that submission. And then when the student submits their final submission, the plagiarism review for the final submission shows up as very high because it's comparing the final version against the draft version. So we're going to not store the submitted paper for the draft version, and we're also going to want to show that report to students immediately so they can see the results of that plagiarism detection. So if you do want students to be able to submit, see if their work is showing up as plagiarized, and then submit, the final version of their thesis at a later date, it is recommended to create two assignments. And for the draft one, make sure you do not store the submitted paper and show the report to students immediately. You could also do that within the one assignment, but it's a bit more hassle. Basically, you would just, for example, say, okay, Turnitin, do not store the submitted paper, show the report to student immediately. And let's say if the final thesis is due for end of November, get the student to submit their draft version, excuse me, kind of, well ahead of that sometime in October. A question which has come up before relates to Turnitin and AI detection, specifically Gen AI developed content created with the likes of ChatGPT or other elements. Our experience, and kind of this is what the research supports, is very simply that there is no clear guarantee that any plagiarism detection tool will absolutely, definitely capture instances of Gen AI developed content. And our experience has been that anyone who is trying to sell you a tool which says this will definitely catch 100% of ChatGPT content is selling you a pup. So there is no way of ensuring that Turnitin will capture Gen AI developed content, but there are some practical common sense steps that you can take that can greatly help to reduce instances of that happening. A very big thing is just setting clear AI assessment parameters. So very simply what that means is when you create an assignment, to communicate to students, maybe even to have it in the brief for the assessment, that this is what I am happy for you to use Gen AI tools for. This is what you should not use Gen AI tools for. So for example, maybe students maybe, again, this is very much an individual decision for lecturers, maybe you're okay with students using ChatGPT, for example, to get some feedback on stuff that they've developed, or maybe for idea generation, maybe, but you absolutely do not want students using ChatGPT to develop actual assessment content that they're then going to submit. Or alternatively, maybe you don't want them using ChatGPT or similar tools at all, in which case a very useful and kind of clear step is to simply communicate to students as part of the brief, this is what I am happy for you to use tools like ChatGPT for. This is what you absolutely cannot use tools like ChatGPT for. So setting AI assessment parameters is a good first step. Additional options, although we appreciate this might not always be feasible, is looking at alternative forms of or tools for assessment. So, for example, within Canvas, there's a variety of different kind of um, submission types, which one can avail of. Um, you could, for example, use student annotation, whereby you upload a file and students have to annotate the file within Canvas with their feedback, including elements of reflection, personal reflection as part of an assignment, focusing assignments around real world examples, real world data, real world case studies. ChatGPT and Gen AI tools don't do very well with those. An additional step you can take as well is to highlight the presence of Turnitin. So essentially, this is just a form of deterrent by saying to students, okay, you have to do this assignment for me. And also, all of your work is going to be checked through Turnitin, which is the leading plagiarism detection solution in the world today. Very often that might be enough of a deterrent, without saying too much, to encourage students or to kind of make students think twice about going off and using tools like ChatGPT. Additional elements then is just focusing on the process of assessment as opposed to the final output of assessment. So encouraging and talking to students about the importance of the assessment process, of what they learn along the way, of how this will benefit them in their future careers. And very simply talking to students about maybe their own usage of ChatGPT tools or concerns that they might have around around ChatGPT, not only within MTU but also in the workplace. So talking to students as well is a very good way of determining where they are at with these kind of tools and what their you know insights, their concerns, etc. maybe. In terms of support for Turnitin, obviously Canvas support is always available. So if you have any difficulties in terms of accessing or developing anything in Canvas, you can very simply click on the help button. And we recommend using the web chat with Canvas support with faculty as the main kind of way of talking to Canvas support agents 24/7. If you have any TEL specific issues, for example, cross-listing and so on and so forth, you can email us at edtech@mtu.ie. And if you have any issues in terms of Turnitin, what you can do is you can contact Turnitin support. So they have a website, which is helpcenter.turnitin.com. And they have guidelines and kind of information about Turnitin on that site. But they also, in that same site, have, excuse me, I thought I had a slide in about it. But essentially, if you go into this help center.turnitin.com, they have support topics for user guides and so on and so forth. You can also click over here to submit a request. And what that will allow you to do is it will allow you to send a message to Turnitin support agents. So for that, you simply select Turnitin ticket form, put in your MTU email address, and the Turnitin product, you're going to want to select similarity. That is the key element, and similarity checking is going to be kind of, I think, the most useful or the most important tool to be used there. Accessing Turnitin, select Canvas, user role, select instructor, and you can put your query into the subject description, and you can add an attachment if you so wish. So I think this is a good place to kind of finish up. But if anybody does have any questions, so if anyone has any in Zoom has any questions, please feel free to put it into the Q&A section there. And if anyone watching on YouTube has any questions, please feel free at this moment to put them into the YouTube live chat. So I'll just shut up for a second to allow everyone the chance to ask any questions if you do have them. Again, if you're in Zoom, please do put them into the Q&A section. Okay, well, I'm going to take that silence as a sign that everybody is relatively happy. Um, if you do want to test Turnitin yourself, you can, of course, create a Turnitin assignment, click View a Student, and then submit something to that if you do want to maybe try and get to grips with the system. But other than that, and sorry, we also have some Turnitin help articles on our help doc website. Other than that, thank you very much, everyone, for your time and for your attention, and the very best of luck for the coming semester.